It's really great to have you here to celebrate the work of Christine Howard Sandoval. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm trying to get used to the sound. The speaker's over there, and I hear this small echo. Welcome to the Institute of Contemporary Art San Diego. This is ICA San Diego month. Yeah. This is actually our third event of the month, and we have another event coming up next Friday. We're just taking over all the Fridays of September. So next Friday, we're having an opening of the work of Gabriel Rico, who's here somewhere tonight. He's up there. He'll come down soon. And Gabriel's work will be in our Balboa Park location. If you haven't been before, it is the former San Diego Art Institute, and now is the ICA San Diego Central space. And this is the ICA San Diego North. The Institute of Contemporary Art San Diego presents experimental art and learning with a mission to question everything. I want to state that so you know who we are and what we're all about. And before we get started, I want to acknowledge that ICA San Diego, both Central and North, sits on ancestral homeland of the Kumeyaay Nation. The museum extends its respect and gratitude to the Kumeyaay people who have taken care of the land since time immemorial. And I'd like to especially thank our board of directors and to our amazing ICA team for making all of this possible tonight. A big round of applause. Thank you so much. They are the people who make everything happen, literally from making that speaker up there to getting me this microphone tonight. And ultimately, we're recording this as well and posting it on YouTube tonight. So this is all around. Thank you so much to our team. And I especially want to thank our curatorial team, Husha Sanders, as well as Roxana Lopez. Thank you both for making this exhibition possible tonight, for installing all of that fantastic work that is oh so delicate, and being very careful with doing all of that. Our organization is made possible by the ongoing support from the cities of Encinitas and San Diego, the County of San Diego, the California Arts Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. I'd like to welcome Christine Howard Sandoval, our very first artist in residence, for our new season about ecology. It is entitled In This Broad Earth of Ours, which is a quote from Walt Whitman that recognizes our existential connection to the earth. Christine's work challenges the boundaries of representation, of access, and habitation through the exploration of indigenous spaces that have been contested and affected by hundreds of years of colonization. Her practice negotiates the physicality of our current landscape and presents future imaginaries. She seeks long-term engagement with places and their people as a means of exploring her own self-identity that is intimately formed by land and community. Howard Sandoval has exhibited nationally and internationally at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Vancouver, Disjecta in Portland, the Museum of Capitalism in Oakland, Design Transfer in Berlin, and Museo del Barrio in the Bronx, and Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens, New York. Her first solo museum exhibition debuted at the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center in May of 2019, during which time she was the Mellon Artist in Residence at Colorado College. She has also been awarded residencies at UBC Okanagan, is that said correctly? The Indigenous Art Intensive Program, Santa Fe Art Institute, Triangle Arts, and the Vermont Studio Center, as well as now the ICA San Diego. She holds a BFA from Pratt in New York and an MFA from Parsons, the New School of Design, also in New York. She is currently assistant professor of interdisciplinary art in the Audane Faculty of Art at Emily Carr University. So please give a hearty welcome to Christine Howard Sandoval.
This is a very experimental setup that we have here, so I hope you can see the projection. I feel like we're separated by this beautiful waterway. It's like a marshland or something. I just want to start by thanking the incredible team here at the ICA. I can't tell you how much gratitude I feel for this team. They do everything, and they care about the artists that come here, and I feel very supported, and I just want to give a round of applause for this team because they are incredible. So much so that I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. All right, so I have talking notes, and what I do usually is prepare these very extensive talking notes, and then I just like throw it out the window and start talking off the cuff. So we'll see how this goes. So I'm really honored to be here tonight on the indigenous lands of the Kumeyaay, and the Kumeyaay have been here since time immemorial. This is their unceded and traditional lands, and I am indigenous to the lands up north through the Chalon Ohlone. I'm also Hispanic and Mexican, so I'm of mixed heritage, and my family's here tonight, and I feel really excited that they're here sharing this work with me. So very happy to be here tonight. This is also the first time that I've been outside of Vancouver. I've relocated there to teach right before the pandemic, and I've been there. I haven't been back to the U.S. Haven't been back across that border since we went in 2019. So this is quite a momentous moment, not just to leave isolation in Vancouver, but also to come back to my homelands and present my work for the first time in California. So this is many layers of amazement for me personally. So thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm going to start here with an image from my grandmother's photo album, which was just gifted to me. This is my grandmother in the way that she maps out our ancestors, and the whole book starts in 1915 and then moves forward. And she was really kind of an archivist, the way that she collected things and mapped things and documented all of our family, and receiving this book as a gift from my auntie was quite an amazing gift. And so I want to read for you right now a poem by another artist, an Ohlone artist that I admire and who mentors me, Deborah Miranda. It's called Ancestors. We belong to the sea. We are salt water walking on the land in soft containers called flesh. Chloride, sodium, sulfate swim in our veins, warm and elemental. Our bodies sway and swell in response to the tides of our oldest memory. The moon pulls the sea pulls us. Walking on two legs far away from the birthing waters, we travel wide plains, rest a while beside icy streams, making shelters out of snow. Always we seek water wherever we go, look for lost relatives, pieces of ourselves. We smell wetness beneath rock. We raise our faces to gray skies, mouths open. We welcome the fat drops with our thirst. We belong to the sea. We bear her dark green wishes and slippery strands of thought. Magnesium, calcium, potassium, slide through our veins. We make love to each other, oceans aching to reunite. Homesick, we erase our isolation with each other's moist mouths, secret seeps, lonely seas meeting on our slick skins. We belong to the sea. She makes her claim on us in the end, demands our return, asks us for her copper, her cobalt, her molecules of hydrogen, oxygen, iron, bicarbonate, bromide, strontium. We leave flesh behind us on the shore, husks that dry and turn to dust. We slip back into the sea like a child to an embrace, like blood to blood. We give it all back. We go home. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the trajectory of the project, which started in 2018. And it started with conversations with my auntie about our ancestors. And it started with really just getting to know her. And so I started to think about the archive in relationship to family stories. But first I want to read a quote from a writer named Ariella Aisha Azoulay, who talks about the archive, and she published a book in 2019 that was really important to the research that I've been doing about imagery and photography and accessing archival materials. Unlearning the archive, as dictated by its official mission, starts with a disavowal of the spatial and temporal regime of institutes, a disregard of the contours of the threshold as marked by its guardians, a refusal to enter the building and study my companion in his absence. This comes from a book titled Potential History, Unlearning Imperialism. So, talking with my auntie, who currently lives in assisted living in Virginia, I had not had a relationship with her up until then. And so we spent hours really talking about family history, her stories, heartbreak, migration, relationships, and I documented many things that she said and took a lot of those stories of resilience, and I'm starting to grow those seeds into a much broader knowledge. And as I learn these things, I send her information that she is reading and going through. She's also going through a very intense chemotherapy right now for an aggressive cancer. So I feel an urgency just to give her that information as she's trying to fight the cancer right now. So there's this other responsibility that's tied into the work, which feels like a responsibility to giving back to family. And so there's my art practice, and then there's this whole other thing that's happening. And in some ways, it feels like the real work. So this past summer, as was said earlier, that I was participating in a residency at the UBC Okanagan, and there was a scholar, a Tuscarora scholar named Jolene Ricard, who I've met in person, but also she was giving a talk about her Tuscarora heritage, and she was talking about tribal knowledge and how lucky she was that she was born into tribal culture that was not scattered. And I felt like she was really talking to me, and she was talking about our responsibility to come back to our homelands, to come back to tribal heritage and practices and ceremonies. And so Jolene has been a real influence on me. And I feel like from afar and up close through our conversations in her public talks that I've really, she's really had a profound effect on me. All right, so let me get into the work. So starting with this work, I went back to my fourth grade. Speaking of archives, I went back to the fourth grade project that I did about missions. And on the left is a drawing that I did when I was 10 that is a portrait of Father Junipero Cerro, who was really the architect of missionization in California. Next to it is a notebook page from the most important cultural anthropologist in California. His name is John Peabody Harrington, and if you're Indigenous, you know J.P. Harrington. He was responsible. He spent his life studying the languages, the daily practices, the lives, the architecture, and the history and the stories of California tribes for his entire life. So his archive is very important to us. It's very important in terms of reconstituting traditional practices. So here we have a notebook from him. And I started thinking about what would it mean to place my drawings that I did when I was 10 next to his notebook pieces that are a part of the more official archive. And here on the right, I have a translation of the page on the left, which is written in his handwriting. I'll just read a bit of it for you. 16 years ago, Ignacio Cordova helped dig 62 bodies from old Indian Mission graveyard on north side of the Mission between Mission and Choro Street. Those that had bad skull with natural blank cross on. The head were pronounced by priest to be blank, others not, were buried in southwest corner of present cemetery without names, altogether, no stone or anything to mark, coffinless, wrapped in blankets. Burials at A.O. Martinez place, often part of blank Las Ranch, no buildings there, were because of poverty, 4 men carried them down on a bier. So you can tell that this is just very quick note-taking. The blank areas are places where the handwriting is just totally undecipherable. And I started to get interested in just the way that he was note-taking from informants. And in this case, he was working with a Chumash elder at the San Luis Obispo mission. And he was mapping and drawing different areas within the mission. Here you can see the rectangle at the top is a courtyard, and you can see a wall. This is his drawing of some of the land there at the San Luis Obispo mission. He marks where there were houses, what the streets were, and around that he's recording some of the information from the elders. And then I got the opportunity to do a site-specific public art piece in Vancouver that was at a train station, so it's this kind of liminal space where people are passing through. And I decided to blow up some of my 10-year-old drawings, billboard size, and place them alongside of J.P. Harrington's notes and some of the archival material that I was finding that was about architecture, language, land. Here is a very historical old map of Tenochtitlan in Mexico City. And in the center, you see a plaza space that was built by, that was the original Aztec village. So all of Mexico City is kind of built on top of this ancient city of Aztec culture. And the reason why this map is really important is because it locates the plaza, it locates indigenous space before the Spanish came as a kind of organized space that then was very influential on Spanish plazas, Spanish mission sites where you have a central courtyard. So it's the first time that scholars are really figuring out that urban design and the design of space actually finds its roots within indigenous cosmology and spiritual practices, whereas before it was really attributed to European practices and European thinking of architecture, design, and space. So I wanted to compare that to the site of the mission and the way that that space then influences this space. And in the center, you have a courtyard area, and then around it, you've got the mission site, which then becomes a museum. Here, we're actually sitting in a museum, so the missions are another kind of cultural museum. We all have our narratives that are being communicated through the institutions, and I think that the missions have a very specific type of narrative that they're trying to convey about California history, but I think there's another perspective. There are many other perspectives that have not been given space, have not been communicated publicly, and those mostly are the indigenous perspectives of this land. So I wanted to start thinking about the archive, and that was my first attempt, which felt really distant, actually. It felt like I was kind of hovering around these larger narratives of the colonial history of California, but they were the stories that we hear a lot. I wanted to find something that was more personal, so I emailed the National Archives to find my family's, anything that had to do with my family history. It took them over a year to get back to me. So I emailed them March of like 2019, and then in late 2020, I get a random email from a researcher at the National Archives that said, "We found your grandmother and your family in the archive." And so they sent me this 6-page document that was my great-grandfather's application for the enrollment of 1928, which was a land claim. And it was, if you don't know the history of this land claim, it's something that's really being talked about right now through the truth and healing process that California is going through. So my family, in these documents, the ancestors, all my ancestors are listed, which means that my great-grandfather had all of this knowledge in his memory. Stories were being passed down. He could really convey very specifically who we were, what our names were, where we were born, and I could start to trace those locations directly through his knowledge. With his handwriting. So here I am looking at J.P. Harrington's handwriting, and now I have my great-grandfather's handwriting to start to decipher and look at. So that was a very special experience for me, and amazing that I actually got that information. So I took the work and I created a piece that you saw in the gallery, which is a 6-part piece for each page within the document that shreds the document. It holds the information as a kind of private space. It's a redaction of information that refuses a public audience into that information. It refuses something that was openly given in an archive and keeps it for our family history and our family knowledge, and then weaving it back into the mound, weaving it back into the land as a call to the land as our real archive, actually. So these are very recent works, very experimental. I think that this work will go on. I have so many documents that I want to shred and embed and weave into mounds in different forms. So this is the beginning of something. Next to that is a drawing. It's the first drawing that I made in the series at this scale. And the work is, it's thinking about stratification. It's thinking about the way things are embedded in the land as a kind of archive. So that whole room with those 2 pieces is kind of the archive cove. It's a place where I'm really thinking about a different way of approaching archival material. And then, of course, all this work is made with Adobe. So I'm going to do something also experimental, where I'm just gonna play a video. I just got back from Mission Soledad, where I went with my parents, and we were able to visit the site where our ancestors were, and which formerly was actually traditional land before it became mission land. And I want to read another poem by Deborah Miranda called Adobe as I show you this video. Adobe. Recipe. Gather your Indians from the mission. Try to catch them between their regular chores of tending the fields, chasing cattle, cooking, weaving, mandatory prayers and catechism instruction. Then you need dirt, water, straw, sometimes horse manure. Make sure it's good dirt, not too much clay, or the bricks will crack as they dry. Your Indians might have to haul some dirt in, which could take days, and no mules. A cart if they're lucky, baskets if not. Tell them to dig a big round basin in the ground, soak it well with water. Throw everything in. That water has to come from someplace. River, spring, rain barrels maybe. Indian women make some baskets good as buckets. Keep some of the men running back and forth for water, while the others jump into the pit and start mixing with their feet. Shovels are valuable and hard to come by. Make sure the iron is not stolen for weapons. This is where good legs are a blessing. The work keeps their dancing muscles in shape, and they seem to like dirt, aren't concerned about the ripe odor. Mission building is smelly business. Now, when it's all mixed, they'll start the rhythm of scoop and slap. Scoop up that mud, slap it into a wooden form. Pack it in good and tight. Repeat till the form is full. Move on to the next. Oh, wooden forms. Before beginning, you must assign Indians to cut down trees and make lumber for the forms, and then make the forms. Few nails to be had, but they're clever with rope and vine once you get the idea across. Anyhow, as soon as the whole form is full, have the Indios check and see if they can lift it right off those bricks so you can reuse it. In an hour, perhaps a day, the bricks should stand alone, mixed right. Now, if the weather holds, you can leave the wet bricks right there. Turn them once in a while, let the air and heat bake them hard. When the rain threatens, the Indians must weave reeds and grasses as they do for their own mats. Adobe takes 3 or 4 weeks to cure. So you want to build up a good supply before you start building anything like a mission. Dried, each brick weighs about 60 pounds. Stacking one upon the other requires strong Indians, especially when climbing ladders and makeshift scaffolding. All in all, adobe is cheap, the ingredients free for the taking. But you will certainly go through a lot of Indians. More lazy creatures on earth we have never seen. A wall is a shadow on the land. This is one of the iterations of the work that I made in Vancouver in an exhibition, thinking about the material of adobe, thinking about the fact that it's not indigenous to California, that it's actually a colonial material. The labor of transporting water from local water holes required sometimes miles of travel. Carrying heavy hand-woven watertight baskets. This is Mission Soledad, a photograph also found in the Bancroft Library, 1896. This is the place where I was walking, so you see this facade right here. And I love how the the plastic and the negative of the photograph is warped in ways. It's kind of feels like it's warped by the heat and the wind and the elements in some way. It's as degraded as the facade of the mission is. This is also a photograph from Soledad. This is an image from the archive that I've really been looking at. I've been looking at this image for about 2 years now. It's interesting because there are these different scenes, and it's from the Vista del Presidio del Monterrey, which is really close to Soledad, where we were. And here on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, you've got a military figure who's standing and kind of speaking down to a group of indigenous people. In the foreground, you have these two figures who are carrying water on a kind of gurney. And so thinking again about this labor of carrying water to make the adobes, sometimes walking 15 miles and carrying that water back from the river, mixing the land with your body and then slabbing it and building the facades. I started thinking about how, the basket is a kind of stand-in for the body. And that the body, after all of that labor, starts to break down, starts to wear down. And I started working on the sculpture that you saw in the gallery, and thinking about the relationship between a vessel that holds water like a basket, and a vessel that holds water like a body, and that those things in this image are placed on a structure that's like a gurney, and that gurney is literally carrying a body from one place to another, and started thinking about something that is worn down through history. And so thinking about all of those things, the sculpture started to happen, and this is a really new technique for me of weaving layers of tape and mud and kind of building up a form. And I start, as you saw in the image before, I start with a structure. So there's this pretty heavy structure underneath that then gets built out over many layers of mud and tape and slabbing and, all of that labor. And also, so there were several archaeological digs that happen at Mission Soledad. That this one in particular is really interesting because it finds the original wall. So when you think about this title, The Wall is a Shadow on the Land, it finds this original wall that's embedded into the land and was uncovered through an archaeological dig. And they believe that this was one of the walls for the women's quarters. So men and women were separated in the mission, and also age groups were separated as well. So there were these different quarters where different categories of people had to sleep and eat and live. So this is the wall that was found underneath the grounds, right besides the reconstructed mission. And again, going back to architecture, this is another drawing from my 4th grade report. Really unskilled, untaught drawing, which I really appreciate looking back right now. And so architecture has been another vehicle to enter this narrative, another vehicle for me to think about form, for me to think about the construction of space, and to start looking at the way that these spaces were replicated throughout the coast of California, but also in Mexico as well, along the Pacific coast. And I started with one of those mission kits that has laser cut styrofoam pieces, and just started working through scanning, imaging, the reduction of form, turning something into just a graphic image, and looking at the similarities and the repetitions. And that's where I started to pull some of these forms out for the drawings, which are sometimes pieced together in modular forms of paper. And so the architecture of Spanish colonialism is modular. So you'll find often this repetition of different aspects of the mission that are repeated in all of the sites throughout the coast. And then finding an echo of those forms in other aspects of mission life, which this is called a korma, and the korma was a hobble that was tied to the ankles of Indian people in the missions when they were being punished for trying to get back to their villages or doing something wrong or speaking their language. And this is an old sketch, also coming from the Bancroft Library. I want to fast. Oh, I thought I had an image. There is a drawing in the gallery next to, this one right here. So thinking about the relationship between the arch and the span of an arch, which is an entrance space, a space where you enter, a space where you exit, a liminal space that describes what is inside and what is outside. And then thinking about the repetition of that form in the hobble as this other type of arch that is based on binding the body in some way. So both being kind of bindings of the body, ways of imprisoning the body in different scales and different forms. These are other archetypes of the drawings that I did in large scale. Thinking about the facades, thinking about them as monuments, monuments that eventually will fall and go back to the land. And then the opposite of the Spanish colonial architecture are the mounds, and then the mounds are traditional to indigenous architecture. So this is an app which is a Chumash architecture domestic space, sometimes a ceremonial space made of tule grass. Tule grass, as you probably have seen, I just passed a whole marshland the other day of tule harvested, and then it's woven and thatched onto willow branches. And these are transitional spaces as well. They're temporary dwellings that are taken down with the season. Different seasons, there are movements and migrations. And so that's why the equinox is an important part of ceremony. This is another etching. The text at the bottom says, Digger Indian lodges, earthen mounds situated on the side of Sacramento River. And so when I first started making these mounds, it was just material that I was taking off of my drawings. So when I unmasked the drawings, I have this material that builds up, and I started to build sculpture. So while I'm unmasking the drawings, I'm simultaneously building these mounds. And I started to embed imagery into the mounds, and thinking about them as these they were like figures for me. They started to become, again, this, slippage between architecture, the figure, the figurehead in this case. This one is called The Eaters, where the eaters are consuming these colonial images. The stand at the bottom is influenced by tripod structures, tripods that hold cameras, that hold any type of viewing apparatus, land surveilling technology. And so these really influence the piece that is in the gallery that's kind of overlooking the landscape. So the work continues, and the next step is to take all this footage and the experience of going back to Soledad and start making a video. And what I do is I make these walking videos where I record myself with these surveilling cameras that are attached to my body, and then write a script, so a voiceover narrative that unpacks all of these stories in a first-person narrative. And the land really choreographs my gestures. And I was just very lucky to be in touch with the people who are caretaking that mission, which is generations of family members who live in Soledad, who gave me permission to enter the ruins, which are a protected site, and interact with them with my body, walk them without shoes or socks, and really just experience the land. And so this is what I've been working on when I've been here at the residency. So it's given me a chance to come back home and to do the work that I've been doing from afar for a couple of years now. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christine. I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions, so please raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone. Can you hear me? I don't know. If at the end of the Q&A, if you want to see the show again, we'll open the gallery back up, so you can head back up. But does anybody have a question?
Yes.
When I was at the top of the hill, I didn't get to go in the gallery.
Oh, you get to go in the gallery after the Q&A. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions?
So, when you were young, you did this representational art, and then you evolved into this stuff. Can you transition us to this stuff?
So that was when I was 10. I don't think I considered myself an artist at that time, but maybe. So the project was, if you have raised your children here for any length of time and they went to public school, they would have done the 4th grade mission project. And so part of that, there was a visual component, and one of the components was to make these drawings. And so what I did was choose to observe the drawings and replicate them in a very untrained hand. And the other part of it was to build a mission model of whatever mission that you were assigned at that time. And so those drawings were possibly locate an early aesthetic encounter, but I wouldn't say that I was thinking about the aesthetics of what my artistic practice would be. And so I just think it was an interesting decision, some of the decisions I made, and looking at those documents, and if you were to look at them very closely, you would see all of my erases and all of the struggle that I went through. And mostly it was with the eyes and trying to get Padre Serra's eyes, which was really interesting. And so you blow that up, you see all of those marks in the train station. So not sure if that answered your question, but
Thank you. I think this is on. Is it on? Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, I don't talk on the microphone often enough. I was curious about the two Deborah Miranda poems that you read or shared with us, and I wondered at what point you encountered her work and how you integrated in the artworks themselves as well as the lecture talk. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Deborah Miranda wrote a book called Bad Indians that I read in 2017. I highly recommend reading it. It's an experimental memoir where she takes her life and the archive of her family and uses it also to intervene into the archive. And when I read it, it was such had such a profound effect on me. And I kept reading it and I keep reading it and I keep coming back to it. And then I reached out to her and introduced myself and asked her if she would do some talks with me for the last show that I had. So we started to have a dialogue where she shared her poetry and she read her poetry and had discussions with me about the work that I'm doing. And it feels like I kind of found a sister in a way, and she says the same thing. And so the work, I don't know anybody else who's doing work like she is, but it feels like there's such an overlap between our thinking and our intention. So I keep going back to her, and I keep talking to her about all of the things that I'm learning about my history as it's unfolding, and she's just been really supportive. So first it was that encounter with her memoir, and then it was starting to get to know her personally and sharing my work with her. So I feel like she does it in a literary way. She approaches the archive through her poetry and writing, whereas I do it through material and aesthetic form. So it feels like we're doing the same thing, but through very different languages.
A little workout in.
Thank you very much for your presentation, but I just one comment and then one question. My comment is, you cannot see this, but the sky has been putting on an incredible show, what you've been talking. The interaction with the moon, the star, the planet, I guess, and the clouds. I can't help thinking that may not be accidental for what you're talking about. But so my question is, could you talk a little bit about your process of how you get the Adobe on the paper in such straight lines? And also, we all notice that some of it is degrading somewhat, and I'm wondering, when that happens, do you repair it, or do you just consider that a natural process?
Thank you for that question. So, yeah, I guess I didn't go really into the technique or the process of making these things. So the Adobe is a mixture of clay, sand, water, a binder, soil, and it really depends on where I'm working. So if I'm working in the Southwest, or if I have permission to be working on this land, then I will work with the community, whoever's land I'm on, and I will harvest that material. Since I've been in Vancouver, I've been in a temperate rainforest. So working with Adobe in the temperate rainforest is a complete anomaly. So I found new ways to harvest just soil from my yard, from the place where I live, and mixing it with experimenting with different types of clay. And what I do with the clay is that I make a slip out of it, which is like a liquid clay, and then mix it with earth and sand and glue and find the right consistency and then work from there. So it's been a lot of moving to Vancouver has been there's been a lot of experimentation with material to try to figure out how to work there. So I'm still very invested in this material and what it does and what it means and what it communicates. So I don't want to give it up. But I'm also really questioning right now how to make Indigenous protocols more transparent in the work. So, and also thinking about the ecological impact of art making and shipping. These works, they need big crates and a lot of apparatus and material and money to ship. What would happen if you made this work in a more site-specific way and you let that live where it is rather than transporting these things, so that the work itself was more of a response to a site. What would happen if artists start to consider the conditions of production in relationship with climate change a little bit more, especially with shipping? And I think that this work has the potential for that. So I think I'm really questioning this right now. But the work, it sheds some of its material, but it's really durable, actually. It's been put to the test in different ways. It's really been put to the test. And the work is, it's an architectural material. So it can go through a lot of wear and tear because it's already very raw anyways. And as it starts to shed its surface, that's just the nature of the work.
Could you talk about the process of the drawings as well, how you create those?
Okay. Right, that was the second part of your question. So what I do is I start with laying out a drawing digitally, thinking about scale, thinking about composition, and then I transpose that through graphite drawing onto the paper through a set of horizontal and vertical lines. So I break up a form into mathematically into horizontal and vertical lines. So it's all measured. And then I draw that onto the paper. And that gives me a system to follow in terms of taping off the places that I want to just be paper, just negative space, just, to keep clean. So I tape that all off, and through each one of these phases of the process, the image changes. And so I work with a particular type of tape, and I tape it off, and then I mix for those big drawings, I mix a huge amount of Adobe with my feet in a traditional way, and I slab it all on. And I think the gallery actually has some images of me doing that in the studio. I slab it on into these big 5x9 feet pieces of paper. So it's this pretty thick slab of mud going onto paper. And then I start in one go, I will unmask the entire drawing because it has to be done while wet. So it's a very rigorous and focused process, which I've been doing over the course of COVID, which has been a really nice way for me to counter all of the consumption and the distraction. It's kind of requires you to be super present in the work. So all of that gets unveiled, like it gets pulled, and then the sculpture gets built simultaneously. So that's a full 8 to 10 hour day of work.
I have two questions, please. First of all, your work is lovely. And then that's my comment. My first question is, did you make the water gurney, the metal? Do you work in metal as well?
No, I don't. No.
Okay, so you put the Adobe on the handles
Yeah.
to bring the work together and understand it. It was so meaningful when you showed the two people hefting the water. That just made so much sense, the basket on it and stuff. My second question, the other walls where you have the arches and the squares on your drawings are very geometric. And then on the south wall over near where the water thing is, there's one that's very linear, but it's a real organic interruption in the middle of it. And I was wondering what the organic interruption was.
Well, I started to, I was making those drawings and really putting a lot of emphasis on the Spanish colonial architecture. At the same time, thinking about the stratification of land, what would happen if you really treat the land as an archive and you start to dig down, what would you find? And I think we're starting to see what you find with the revelations that are happening in Canada right now at the residential schools. We're finding the truth of colonial history. It's buried in the land. And so I wanted to think about those mounds as a kind of figural presence, as an Indigenous figure. The mound, to me, is kind of an Indigenous figure in the work. And that's a buried mound form that is echoed through the exhibition in different ways.
I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much, Christine. That was really
Thank you.
wonderful.